for coming out tonight and being part of this. We hope to provide some information to you and to give you as much information as we can. Allow our lawmakers who are on the ground in Austin to provide some feedback and then to take questions you may have about what's going on in the whole process of the legislative process. I'm going to spend time tonight giving you an overview of what we feel is going on in kind of our perspective. And I'm going to do it first on school finance because that's getting 99.9% of the press. But I don't want to leave out school accountability and teaching and learning. Because no matter what we have to operate the system on next year, we still need to educate at a quality level 32,000 kids. And we have to figure out how to do that even if we have fewer resources. And so there are things that are also occurring in implementation of House Bill 3 that was passed last session that's greatly going to change the dynamics for kids, for testing and for graduation. So I want to give you an update on that too. But I'll start out with the one that gets all the press right now, and that's school finance. You know, everything that we're operating under right now is speculation. The only thing we know for certain is that the comptroller has come out with an estimate of revenue. And even within that estimate of revenue, you have people who are speculating, is that a $15 billion deficit, is it a $25 billion deficit? Because it's all how you look at the numbers. And there are so many pieces of the pie, so many types of funding, multiple sources of state revenue, multiple sources of federal revenue. You know, I know one of the last analysis I saw is that the state of Texas now, in the overall budget of the state of Texas, over 50% is from federal funds, not from local state funds. Over 50% is federally funded in the state's budget in the state of Texas. So it's a very complicated piece of how you look at those numbers, and that adds to the complication of it. So what I'm going to talk to you about is not certainty, even though it may sound that way at times, but everything is based on speculation, estimates, and projections of where we think things are going to go. What we do know is that in the House of Representatives, through appropriations, and in the Senate through finance, that they have put out draft appropriation bills that they have to as the starting of the process, and that those bills essentially reduce public education spending by $10 billion at the state level. Now, what does that translate into Spring Branch? One thing I think it's very important to remember, in Spring Branch, we often, because we've been in Robin Hood for 5, 6 years now, 7 years, so much of the discussion and questions I get is around Robin Hood. Robin Hood is still there, but it's not the major factor to focus on today as everything else. This reduction is going to affect all 1,033 school districts across the state of Texas, not just Spring Branch. Now, how the reduction is made could have a different effect on Spring Branch from another school district. But the reduction is going to happen across the board. Every school district in the state will have less dollars to operate on next year than they have this year. And I think that's a fairly certain, at a $10 billion level, that's a fairly certain assumption. Now remember, that $10 billion level of reduction was generated because the state has to show a balanced budget. So again, that's our starting point, and then we're going to work from that point. So then the question becomes, okay, if $10 billion is the worst case, where does it eventually end up at the end of May when the session is over? And we hope that it's decided by the end of May, right? I would like to not spend your whole next 2 years in Austin. So at the end of May, where will we end up? And our best case estimate in Spring Branch is that $10 billion would go to $5 billion. That's what we're considering our best case. Now, I know that doesn't sound very optimistic as the best case, but that's what we really think is the reality, that if 10 can get to $5 billion statewide, that may be the best situation we could be in the state for the next 2 years. And remember, the budget that they're going to approve is a 2-year budget. So the decisions that occur are going to affect us for a 2-year period of time. We think that there's a middle ground somewhere in there of about $7.5 billion. Now, how does that translate all into Spring Branch? At the $10 billion level, we estimate that would mean we would have $40 million less each year to operate the system. We currently spend about $253 million. We take in about $253 million to operate the system. So $40 million, which is about 12, or actually 15% of the budget, is our worst case projection. Our best case projection at that $20 billion, or excuse me, the $5 billion level at the state level translates to $20 million for Spring Branch. And that's about 8%. And then in the middle, 7.5 billion translates to about 30 million. Now again, those are all projections and estimates. And in fact, in each of those categories, there are 3 levels of projections. So at the $5 billion state level, there are 3 possible scenarios for Spring Branch right now. They range from 17.5 to 22.5. We've taken kind of the average of 20. Same thing at the $7.5 billion level, there's kind of 3 numbers. And at the $10 billion level, there's 3 numbers we're looking at. We kind of take the average, and that's how we get the 40, 30, and 20. And remember, that's a reduction in revenue for each year of the biennium. So once you take that first reduction, that reduction stays in place for the second year of the biennium. So that's the state issue, that's the effect on Spring Branch. Now, why are we in that situation? I think that's one thing. We all know the economic issues of the state and of our federal system right now. And economics do play a piece of that. But there is also a structural issue around why there's the lack of funding that we've had in the past for public education. The structural issue occurred in 2006. In 2006, House Bill 1 went into effect. And what House Bill 1 said is we're going to establish a new tax, a business tax. The business tax is going to raise a certain amount of revenue, and the select committee, the group that kind of put it together to present to the lawmakers in Austin, said if we set this tax at this level and we raise a business tax, a broader business tax than what was the former franchise tax, it should raise this much revenue. And we can buy down property taxes by about 1/3. And so we'll bring property taxes down and we'll make it up with the new business tax, and then that will fund public education. So in 2006, they said, we're going to bring down, we're going to buy down your property tax. We're going to guarantee, we're going to set in place that each school district will receive what they were generating locally in 2006. And then we're going to set that amount for the future. And we're at least going to guarantee that you will get that amount that was generated in 2006. Now, there was not part of the issue there in the years of 2007, 2008. There was not a driver for inflation. You were set at that revenue. That looks optimistic now because we're way past that number with the current situation. The problem is the business tax has never raised what it was projected to raise by the committee that studied it and put it together. It was presented to the lawmakers as they looked at putting the business tax in. So there's a structural issue to this piece too that is not just an economic issue. So one thing that's very important for everyone to understand, the community to understand, is if the economy comes back roaring, it will help. But there's still a structural gap that occurs because the projection, I mean the best projections I've seen, the business tax really will never make up the property tax issue. Also on the property tax side, some of that was based on the fact that there would be gains. You know, we were living through a period of time. Those of you who lived in Houston in the late 70s, early 80s know that home prices do not always stay the same and do not always increase 10% a year. Mm-hmm. Now we hit about a 10 or 15 year period of time where we had massive increases in property values, but we're now in that phase again where the values are not increasing at the levels projected. And again, that's the economic driver of this shortfall. That and sales tax being down. But even with values and sales tax, there's always going to be, until we figure this one piece out, there's going to be this structural deficit that occurs between a new, and you know, that's just part of public policy. When you establish something new, you can project what's going to happen. Just like I've given you a lot of projections tonight and estimates. It's a projection and estimate. When you're establishing a new form of revenue, it's a projection and estimate. And what we know now through, I guess, 3 years of collections, that it's not making up what was then lowered in property values. And so there's a structural piece that we have to focus on. Now, What does that translate into Spring Branch? You know, we are developing a lot of models on what the effect is actually in the system at $20 million, $30 million, $40 million. So we're still internally developing those models, but we are 85%, 87% of our cost is in people, it's personnel. You know, we're a labor-intensive business. It's not a cost of goods. You know, we're not bringing goods, putting a margin on it, and selling goods. It is a labor-intensive business. So 85 to 87% of our budget is payroll. And so the key there is that you cannot reduce $20 million, $30 million, and $40 million without reducing positions within the system. And the key there is that we try all the time to make those reductions, because we've made those reductions of being a Robin Hood district for 4 or 5 years at smaller amounts than 20 million. And you try to do that through attrition. So you have a certain amount of turnover. We have 4,700 employees. You have a certain amount of turnover that occurs each year. As you reduce the position, you try to reassign someone into a vacancy somewhere, absorb it through attrition. And we've been able to manage that in the past, but that's going to be a real challenge this time, depending on what level of reductions we have to take. Is it 20 million? Is it 30 million? Or is it 40 million? So we're running all those models, and we're also trying not to do a knee-jerk reaction. You know, one thing that we also know about Austin is that you can't react to everything that happens early in the session. You've got to stay consistent through, and so we don't want to do a knee-jerk reaction and do something drastic that maybe we don't have to do later on. But we're preparing models for what that looks like if we get to that stage, and once we know with more certainty what's going to happen. And so the key is there will be, with those levels, there will have to be a reduction. We will not have 4,700 positions in the system. We'll have to have a lower amount, and we'll try to absorb that through attrition like we have in the past, but it'll be more of a challenge this year to do that, depending on the levels of reductions that we have to take. And so that's kind of here's the state situation. You know, here are the projections at the state level. We do believe it's 2 factors. It's an economic factor. It's also a structural issue within the school finance law. And then on the other piece of how does that translate into dollars in the Spring Branch? And then finally, what does that translate into possible reductions within the system? And so that's what we're working on internally right now to try to address the issues that we're hearing at the state level. I will tell you, our philosophy for 6, 7, 8 years going into Robin Hood has been to, as we make reductions, to really affect the classroom last. In the 8 years, I think we've only made 1 slight adjustment or twice slight adjustments in teacher ratios at the secondary level. We have taken probably 85 to 90% of our reductions in positions in the system, in administrative position, non-campus position. We look at this a little different than you're hearing everyone else look at. We try to run it like a business model. We run a model that says there are campus costs and there are non-campus costs. You hear a lot of people talking today between teachers and non-teachers. And I think that loses perspective in the whole piece of how you run the system. There are either folks that are critical to running the campus or in non-campus positions that are more corporate level. Be the same for any major corporation. Any company that has 4,700 employees, you're going to have a home office, and then you're going to have divisions, or you're going to have actual sites. If it's a retail establishment, you're going to have stores. And there's always going to be a mix between those who are in a store setting or in the corporate setting. So we run a model that says, what's our campus position? For instance, I think a custodian is pretty critical for the running of a school with 1,000 kids, 100 and 125 staff members. We think a cafeteria worker serving meals to our kids is critical to running a campus. We think a bus driver is critical to running a campus. Those things are critical, so it's not a teacher versus non-teacher number, it's a campus versus non-campus number. And we have tried to take our reductions in the last 6 or 7 years heavily in the non-campus side. I'll give you a good example. When I took over superintendent, I've been in the system 15 years, started as a principal next door, took over superintendency 6 years ago. There were 14 individuals on what's called the superintendent's cabinet at that time. We downsized that to 6 members of a senior staff, and that's what it's been the whole time. We went from 14 to 6. When I came to central office, we had, I think, 135. Central administrators were down to 72. So we've been making reductions each year. And in fact, recently the comptroller study came out on efficiency. And out of 5 stars, we had 4.5 stars in that efficiency rating. The issue is that we could turn off the lights for the whole year in the school system and only make up half of a $20 million reduction. We could wipe out all departmental budgets, not reduce them. We could wipe them out and make up half the $20 million. We're talking at levels that are different than we've dealt with in the past. And I think we will manage that well, but it will require some tough decisions as we move forward. And again, the key we have to remember is that if we do have less positions in the system, which I think we will, we still have to be responsible, and we have to be dedicated, and we have to work very hard to provide a quality education to 32,000 kids, because that number's not going to change. You know, the revenue may go down, but we're still going to have 32,000 to 33,000 kids who show up to be educated next year, and they're going to expect the same quality education that they're getting today at a cost that may cost more than we're able to spend in the system next year. Okay, that's the finance side. I'm now going to talk about the accountability and teaching and learning side, which sometimes does not get the same play. There was a major rewrite of the accountability bill a session ago, didn't get at all the coverage this gets. But it's as critical, because that's really what happens with kids every day, no matter what we spend in the system. So you know, we're going from the current tax test, that's in grades 3 through 11, and we're going to go to 2 different tests. We're going to go into a test in grades 3 through 8 called the STAR. So it's going to be much like the tax test in grades 3 through 8 right now. It's going to be a little more difficult in what we call a little more stretch. We have a lot of kids that hit the top of the scale on the tax test today, so we don't really know how well they're doing because they bunch up at the top of the scale. So the STAR is going to have more stretch to it, so we get a better idea of how kids, particularly kids who perform at the high end of the testing, we get a better feel for how they're doing. The big change, particularly for those of you who either have a middle school child right now, or if you have elementary, it'll affect you eventually, but sooner for middle school, and somewhat, not as much high school because it's phasing through, but I know we have a freshman in college, we have a 9th grader, and we have a 6th grader. This directly affects the 6th grader. It won't affect her until 9th grade, but it's something that concerns me as a parent, because it's going to be very rigorous, and we're going to something called end-of-course exams. And currently, I think most of the issues around end-of-course exams are not issues in statute that were approved and voted on by our lawmakers in Austin, but I think there are issues in implementation of House Bill 3 around end-of-course exams. It makes a lot of sense. Instead of giving a tax test, you know, we have kids who are in courses, and they have to stop for 6 weeks and learn some material because in that grade level, it's a general science test, and maybe they're over in chemistry, but they need to learn some biology, but they took biology the year before because they're going to be testing on it this year in the tax test. So it makes sense to move away from tax, a general test each year, to an end-of-course exam. Which means when I take Algebra 1, at the end of Algebra 1, I take a test to see my proficiency in Algebra 1. When I take English 1, at the end of English 1, I take a test to see my proficiency in English 1. That is a good move as far as testing goes. The issue is that's a real different test for kids to take. And we had them years ago, and then they phased out, but they are much harder than the tax test. And the way the law was written said, now, we were trying to scale back the intensity of high-stakes testing, but some things are going to intensify, particularly in the implementation of it. And instead of a student taking a test each year and then in 11th grade having to show proficiency to graduate, they're going to take 12 end-of-course exams. Each time they finish their freshman level in each subject area, each core area, and each time they're sophomore and their junior level, over that time they're going to take 12 exams. And they're going to have a cumulative passing score on all 12 exams to graduate. So they're going to have to produce a high level. So instead of having high stakes in 11th grade, and you know, there are some kids in our system who take Algebra 1 in 7th grade. Kids who are in the Gifted Talent Program. There are a lot of kids who take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. They're going to have to start taking a test that they take in 7th grade is going to count cumulatively to their graduation when they graduate from high school. So high stakes will move a little more into each of those grade levels. And what we need to just really watch is how the Texas Education Agency is doing the implementation of that. Now, in Spring Branch, we're kind of heading in a little different direction. And what we're doing is that we feel, and we've had a lot of conversation with the community, we have a task force of 85 members right now working, and we feel that our real goal is to prepare kids for success when they leave us, not when they're with us. We want them to be successful in some form of higher education, whether it's a 2-year certificate from a community college in a master level of a trade, or it's a 2-year associate degree, or it's a 4-year college degree. We want them to be able to not just walk across the stage and they shake our hands and that we've done our job. We want them to go off and be successful. And what we know is that there's not a university that I have found out there that asks you what your tax score is, or what your school is rated, or what your school district is rated. And if we're going to focus for kids on higher education, we need to spend every time and our energy in the classroom and in our schools focusing on kids on what is going to be expected when they leave our setting. Now, our belief is if we focus at that higher level, they'll automatically do well at a lower level. And so we really want to focus on, in Spring Branch, is preparing every kid to have success in some form of higher education. Again, that could be, you know, if I'm a student and I want to go to a 4-year institution, we want you to go there and be successful. If I want to go and get a 2-year associate degree, we want you to go and be successful. We want you to go there and not have to take remediation. If I want to be a plumber, we want you, instead of going right into or working in an apprenticeship right out of high school, we want you to go and get a master plumber certification. We want you to be at the highest skill level in whatever, we want to value whatever you want to do, but we want you to value it at a very high level. It's real interesting. We looked recently at reading levels of information. Do you know that an auto mechanic reading the manuals to fix a car is at a higher level than any high school or college textbook out there? So, you know, we really want to prepare kids to go and be successful in any of those realms. And we're going to need to watch how this implementation comes out, because next year, the end of course exams start for the current 9th graders. And then they go up a year each year, 10th grade. So our 9th grader, he's off the hook. He's with the tax test. So he'll go to 10th grade next year and stay with the tax test as he goes through. He'll have to take an exit exam in 11th grade for graduation. Our 6th grader will be in the course for the end of course exam. And her graduation will be dependent on not only her successful completion of the course, but also her score on 12 end of course exams. And so that transition is going to start happening too. And in fact, I'm on a conference call tomorrow because there are some modifications in that they're looking at the state level to try to modify that a little bit, to phase it in as opposed to being an overnight kind of quick process of starting. In fact, I was on a call the other day and I was saying some of the concerns, and the response kept being said to me, well, it's not going to affect your district ratings for a couple of years. It's not going to affect your district ratings. I said, I'm not concerned about the district ratings. I'm not concerned about campus rating. I'm concerned about the 9th grader who has to take that exam next year and them being ready for it and it affecting their graduation. That's my concern, because we're going to start those tests next year and they're going to be much more rigorous than we have right now. And that cumulative score, where a kid would have 3 years to kind of build up and do a final exit exam, is now going to count in every one of those courses. We're going to pay attention to that. So that's just a little bit about what's going on with the finance piece. We need to watch and we need to pay attention to the accountability piece. That's critical too. But I think we just really have to, the finance piece is what you're going to hear everything about this session. and it is critical, but we cannot lose sight in spring branch that we still have to do a great job of educating 32 to 33,000 kids next year, and that's going to be our main priority.